Hello, good evening, and welcome. I just got back from a trip to California. I look like a little bit of a mess, maybe, but I would like to continue going through my record collection. I'm going to go through the second row on my right shelf here, all my vinyl records. So this first one I have here is called Happy the Man. It's their first of, I think, 2 albums. It's self-titled. This is a progressive rock band from Washington, D.C., or at least the Washington, D.C. area. Rolling Stone magazine had a list of the 50 best progressive rock albums of all time, and I believe this was number 50, and I bought it because of that. I've got into a lot of music because of that list. Right around the time I was just starting to listen to prog, right around the time I got into Yes. Sort of listening to Yes in the 8th grade. Or I think I technically started listening to Yes sort of late in the 7th grade, actually, and it's sort of like sprang into a full-blown obsession with prog, which then, from itself sprung into a full-blown obsession with experimental music, psychedelic music, and all sorts of very, very weird stuff. This album, the singer's voice is very obnoxious. It's a whiny falsetto. Not a huge fan of it, but fortunately there's a bunch of instrumental tracks on this album, and they are, for the most part, pretty good. It's an okay album. So I have his Klaatu's first album, self-titled, or if you have the Canadian version, it's 3:47 EST, which I believe stands for Eastern Standard Time. This is there's kind of a famous story about this album that's told all over the internet. Basically, when this was released in 1976, originally released in Canada on the Daffodil label, but eventually it got released in the U.S. on Capitol Records. And I guess it got into the hand of some sort of music journalist who started this conspiracy that this was actually a secret Beatles reunion in disguise. And now, some of the songs do sound vaguely Beatles-esque, like California Jam, which is a standout track, and it's probably one of my favorite songs in general. But these were just some random Canadian guys. They had nothing to do with the Beatles, and for that reason, because that conspiracy started, the album actually did manage to chart in the U.S. It's decent. Some of the songs are a bit obnoxious. I have here the West Coast Pop Art Experimental Band, Volume 3, A Child's Guide to Good and Evil. Pretty cool cover, I would say. If you like kind of like psychedelic pop with a little bit of a weird twist to it, this is a pretty good album. I think they had a total of 6 albums. And this is 3 of them are worth listening to more than once. And this, the 3 records they released on the Reprise or Reprise, however you pronounce it. This is a pretty good album. Although the guy who's sort of in charge of the band, Bob Markley, is a really horrible, seedy character. Kind of like a Jimmy Savile. If you know who that is, I'll say no more. But music is pretty good. This is a mono mix. It's a reissue from Jackpot Records, which came out I think around 2018-ish. It's fairly good. The last album by The Nice with Keith Emerson of Emerson, Lake and Palmer fame. This is probably my favorite from The Nice. It's it's a live record. I guess it was supposed to be kind of like a goodbye record from the band. Just Keith Emerson just jamming the fuck out on a keyboard. I like it. It's a nice album. Pretty solid from start to finish. There's a cover of Hang On to a Dream by Tim Hardin, which I like. And My Back Pages, which I believe is Bob Dylan. Here I have a copy of the Rotters Club by Hatfield in the North. I really like Hatfield in the North. I especially like their first album. which I have. I might have gone over that already. This is their second and final album, The Rotters Club. Only released in the UK and Spain, and I have the Spanish version here. It's pretty good. Not as good as the first, but it's still pretty damn solid. It's part of that Canterbury scene canon. You know. Here's a really, really good one. The 5,000 Spirits, or The Layers of the Onion by the Incredible String Band. This, kind of like, you know, which you might call acid folk. You know, it's a Scottish folk duo. At times, it's pretty childlike, almost to the point where it might be a little bit grating, or very grating for most people. But you when you're listening to this music, you kind of have to at least temporarily forget that you are an adult and not a child to be able to get any amount of enjoyment out of this. I remember David Bowie, somewhere on the internet, it's a published list of like his 10 or 25 favorite albums. Whenever like some sort of like famous musical artist, has a list of his or her favorite albums, I'm always keen to check that out to see what, to see what their influences are. And I guess David Bowie is a really big fan of this. I think it's a pretty solid album. Here's a reissue of an album that you guys probably haven't heard of. This is a band called Axis. Now, if you look up, Axis band, there are just several different bands called Axis. This one's a Greek band from the early 70s. They made 2 albums that are sort of just ordinary, Euro pop music, which are, okay. And this album, they got a lot weirder with it. The opening track is pretty good. It's called Waiting a Long Time. Kind of like a, typical hard rock track. It's a very good riff, but then, from there it just sort of just explodes into just, really, really kind of like weird experimental stuff. It's okay. It's a self-titled album. It's the 3rd album, if I'm not mistaken. I have On the Third Day by the Electric Light Orchestra. I had a huge Electric Light Orchestra phase when I was a freshman in high school. And I'd say that, out of all their albums, I think this is probably my favorite because by this point it's their 3rd album. Jeff Lynne's songwriting skills had noticeably improved quite a bit, but at the same time, this is before they had a full-size orchestra behind them. So it's not as overproduced as their later work, and it has a sort of like it has a lot of the same rawness and scratchiness of their other earlier albums, their first 2 albums. So I like it quite a bit. Definitely my favorite from the band. Here I have an album from 2010. It's called An Introduction to Syd Barrett. So this is just a compilation of songs that Syd Barrett wrote for Pink Floyd, as well as some of his the cream of the crop from his 2 solo albums. That being the Madcap Laughs and Barrett. I think the main thing about this compilation that's a little bit interesting is it has that weird alternate mix of Matilda Mother, where they have like they switch one verse out for another or something. And then, there's that song Bob Dylan Blues, which didn't appear on any of his albums, nor that 3rd sort of album with all of his, extra stuff, Opal. Pretty good. It's worth having just for that song alone because it's a pretty good song. Apparently that Bob Dylan Blues song was written pretty early in his career, like 1965 or 66 or something like that. A reissue of Strange Days by the Doors. It's a stereo mix, not the mono mix. At least I think so. Yeah, it's stereo. I like this album. There's a lot of really great songs on here. I had a really hard time getting into the Doors because Jim Morrison's voice, I don't know, for me it was an acquired taste, but when the music's over and People Are Strange, it's a pretty good album, but I don't even know why I'm belaboring the point here. Everyone knows that the Doors are pretty good. In the Aeroplane Over the Sea by Nutrimilk Hotel. I think I picked this up from a record store somewhere in Illinois. It's a reissue. It's of course a classic album. I really don't have to say anything about that album. Nothing I can say about that hasn't already been said. First album by the 13th Floor Elevators. You know, some really great psychedelic pop from Austin, Texas, 1966. So they were kind of, you know, one of the guys who was like, you know, first to the punch with psychedelic rock, along with like maybe like the Beatles' Revolver or Freak Out by Frank Zappa. Out of their 3 albums, I like their other 2 albums a little bit more, but you know, this is still a pretty solid album to listen to from start to finish. FM's Black Noise, their first of, I guess, several albums. This is another one of those albums that was on, Rolling Stone's list of 50 greatest progressive rock albums of all time. Sort of somewhere in the 40s. It's another Canadian band. I'd say about half this album is really good, really great. You know, the songs like Phasers on Stun and 1 O'Clock Tomorrow, Journey and Black Noise are really great songs, but I think about the, you know, other half of the album is just sort of like, you know, filler, just sort of like, you know, uninspired instrumentals. Worth owning. This is not the original cover, by the way. There was an original cover for which there are about 500 copies with the so-called manhole cover. It was sort of like an embossed cover with a picture of a manhole on the front, which I believe those original 500 copies were only available through mail order, which is kind of a strange choice. Henry Cow's first album, the cover's a little bit beat up, but the disc inside is still in pretty good condition. Henry Cow, it's sort of like a group of sort of like weirdo British communists making sort of like clunky, you know, weird jazz rock. This is a really solid album, just completely exhilarating. A lot of portions of this album make my hair sort of stand up on my arms. Really great album. It's the only thing I have from Henry Cow, but I'd very much like a copy of their second album, Unrest. And I do have another album by Henry Cow in there somewhere, actually, In Praise of Learning. Gentle Giant, Acquiring the Taste. So, like I said, I really started getting into prog around like high school, and I was, of course, aware of Gentle Giant for, you know, quite a while, and I do have quite a bit of stuff from Gentle Giant, but I've had quite a bit of a harder time getting into their music. It's pretty intricate stuff. A lot of, you know, crazy time signature changes and tempo changes everywhere, and like, you know, apparently like everyone in the band is like capable of playing like multiple different instruments. So it's very interesting. I think this is probably my favorite by Gentle Giant. It has kind of an interesting cover. It looks like a picture of someone licking, you know, someone's back end, but if you unfold the cover, it's just a peach. I thought that was kind of interesting. I got this for only $20 at a record store in Illinois, which is a really good deal. It's from the famous Vertigo label, but it doesn't have the Vertigo Swirl label. It's, you know, that other label with that John Peel did the artwork for it. Caravan, For Girls Who Go Plump in the Night. I think this was maybe not immediately after In the Land of Grey and Pink, but I think they released Waterloo Lily then this. It's got a lot of really good songs on it. I think In the Land of Grey and Pink is their masterpiece, but there's some good stuff on here. Can't remember where I got that from. A reissue of Space Oddity by David Bowie, or I guess technically it's just a self-titled album. Like I said, I've never really dug deep into David Bowie's discography. But this album's pretty cool. Space Oddity, of course, is a very good song. I do like, you know, The Man Who Sold the World and Hunky Dory quite a bit better than this, because there's some songs in here that just don't immediately jump out at me. The closing track, Memory of a Free Festival, that's a very good song, and I know there was like an alternative mix of that song released on a single where they only made like a few hundred copies. So, original copies of those singles go for thousands of dollars. I've never listened to that alternative mix though, so I don't know if it's any good. Just a reissue of Exile on Main Street by the Rolling Stones. I'm not a huge Rolling Stones fan. There's definitely a few really, really great songs on here. Like Tumbling Dice would have to be my favorite. This is like just some sort of like reissue from Rolling Stones records. I don't know when I got this. Maybe around like 2029-ish. Maybe a little bit earlier. Trout Mask Replica by Captain Beefheart. This is a reissue. It's there was about a 3-month period in high school where I was totally obsessed with this, and this was the only thing I was listening to. This is a reissue from about 2006, and one of the things I've sort of noticed is that this album hasn't really been reissued on vinyl since 2006, and I have a theory why that I don't think is like shared with anyone on the internet. So, 2006 there was Universal Music, which owns a lot of the original master tapes to several different artists. There was a fire there around 2006-ish that destroyed a whole bunch of these original master tapes. And if you look at the list of the artists affected, there's not like a complete list of all the tapes lost, but of the artists who were sort of affected, whose tapes were lost in this fire, includes Captain Beefheart and his Magic Band. That, combined with the fact that this hasn't been reissued on vinyl since 2006, at least not really, sort of gives credence to the theory that the master tapes for this album are just completely lost. That being said, a few record store days back, they did reissue that album on colored vinyl of some sort, and the people who bought that, you can go on Discogs and look under the comments for that particular release. People are complaining about the sound quality. And I believe that the sound quality on that particular reissue from Record Store Day, a few record store days back, is so bad because they did not have the actual original master tapes. That's enough about that. I've said enough about that, so let's keep moving. AMM Music. This was the band AMM. This was their first album. They would make another album again in the 70s, and they would start making a string of albums again in the 80s. But this is from I think 1966 or 1967. It was originally released on Elektra, which also has The Doors and a bunch of other super famous artists. This is a very, very weird album. It's part of that genre of so-called noise music. So, just kind of like, it's just a soup of just dissonant noises. They were using all sorts of instruments, of course, xylophone, guitars, of course, cellos, accordions, pianos, and perhaps most interestingly, the transistor radios. How exactly they were incorporated, I'm not 100% sure, but it's if you're not really acquainted with noise music, it's almost physically painful to listen to this with headphones on. It is just it's quite an experience. I know the way I found out about this band, because I had some sort of biography book about Pink Floyd. And then, it was talking about, some of the people who would play at the clubs that, Pink Floyd would play with, some of the other musicians who would play at the same clubs that Pink Floyd also played at. Back in the 60s, like 67-ish, around the time they had Syd Barrett, and this is like one of the bands. Apparently, okay, maybe the Pink Floyd would play, and then maybe the Soft Machine might play, and so on or so forth, and then maybe Tomorrow would play, but then, at the end of the night, around like 4 a.m.-ish, they would, this band would get up to play, and then, it mentioned how the Beatles came in and saw these guys play before. I'm sure John Lennon, very much enjoyed it. one of the things that sort of stands out to me is the fact that this was released on a major record label. Nowadays, if you want to release anything remotely this crazy, it's going to be released on some sort of like, no-name indie label. And that's the thing to me that's kind of like really magic about the 60s. One thing I've learned, I used to be sort of a purist about listening to music from, like the 70s and the 60s and, to a lesser extent the 80s. I just despise new music, but I've realized that there's good music from, all decades. It's just that if you want to find good music from any particular time period, you might have to dig a little bit. That's the case, at least for me. But, the fact that an album like this was released on a major record label is sort of, one of the reasons why I believe the 60s was such a great decade. People were really trying new things. Let's see what else I have here. I have Rock Bottom by Robert Wyatt. Paid about $50 for this, I think. I'm not a super huge fan of this album. There's some people who think that this is just a really fantastic album, and don't get me wrong, I really like Robert Wyatt. The stuff he did with the Soft Machine was absolutely fucking phenomenal, but I've never really gotten into this, and I'm now finally at the point where I can listen to this from start to finish without feeling compelled to put on something else, but it still doesn't really resonate with me. The sort of the interesting thing about this album is that, okay, he used to play, the drums, and he was very, very good at it, but he had a sort of an incident at a birthday party with, some sort of birthday party with Gilly Smith, who was from Gong. He got blackout drunk and he fell over from the balcony of a 4th-story window, and he broke his legs, and he's been in a wheelchair ever since. And this is the first album that he made after that. And he sings on here. So sort of an obscure psychedelic pop album, the 5 Day Week Straw People. I don't really know much about these guys. I saw this at a record store in Illinois, and the cover looked pretty psychedelic, so I figured it has a decent chance of being good, and for the most part it is pretty good. There's quite a few really, really nice songs on here. Yeah, it's a pretty good album, but I really just don't know very much about it. A Land of Grey and Pink by Caravan, really great artwork, and this is, Caravan's most well-known album. It's a reissue of some sort or another. I don't really have much to say about it apart from that, except for the fact that it's really, really great. Some I have is Lumpy Gravy by Frank Zappa. There's quite a bit of a story behind this. So I think by this point he had already released at least one album with the Mothers of Invention, Freak Out, and maybe also by this point he had released Absolutely Free. And this album, I guess he tried to get some sort of electronic orchestra to play some compositions that he wrote. And the original recordings of his work with this orchestra, are pretty good. They were released, on one of these record store days, and you could go out and buy it. I have a copy of that somewhere in here. But the deal is that he had made a deal with Capitol Records to do this orchestral stuff. And he thought he could get away with it because he wasn't actually playing on the album, but he was originally contractually obligated to work with Verve Records, and so by this point he released his first 2 albums on Verve Records, and Verve Records told him, no, you can't have this music released. Because you're on a contract with us, you can release an album with Capitol, even though he didn't play on it, he just wrote the music. So what he ended up doing is he took the orchestral music that he had performed, and he just cut it up with a bunch of really weird sound effects and reorganized a bunch of the, songs and individual sections, mixed it in with some like weird narrations and stuff. I think I prefer just the clean orchestral version to this, with all the weird sound effects. But this is still pretty nice to listen to every once in a while. This is another one, Resident Alien by Spacehog. So this is I don't know, it's kind of like sort of like 90s, British people sort of trying to like, revive glam rock. A lot of like rock and roll excess on here, but I still like it. It's kind of like a guilty pleasure music. It's so far removed from the stuff I ordinarily listen to, but I still like it quite a bit. For the longest time, this was only available on CD and cassette because it was released in the mid-90s. But they did reissue this on vinyl for the first time a few record store days back. Now, they all sold out before I could get a copy myself, but they did reissue another round for next year, and I did end up getting a copy of this. So I'm very happy to own that. Easy Action by Alice Cooper. Alice Cooper's second album. It's the second of 3 albums that he had in Frank Zappa's label, Straight Records. Now, this is, Alice Cooper's first 2 albums are very strange and weird and experimental. And I like them a lot. I tend to appreciate them more than, some of his later stuff like School's Out and $1 Billion Babies and that kind of stuff. I still kind of like the stuff that he's mostly famous for, but this album is just absolutely fucking brilliant. This is Vampire on Titus by Guided by Voices. Guided by Voices, I think they have like 45 albums out right about now. It's they do, especially in the early 90s, late 80s, they were doing a lot of like really crazy lo-fi stuff, and this is probably the lowest fiest album that they've ever made. It has a very scratchy feel. It's almost kind of like kind of brutal, like the entire album was recorded through a toaster. It's one of the things I sort of appreciate about this album is that it's so scratchy and dissonant sounding, but at the same time the songs are kind of like sad and sorrowful, and it's like such a strange juxtaposition. And I had to listen to this album several times before I could appreciate it, and now I really do appreciate it. I actually got this album from a record store in like central Nebraska, Kearney, Nebraska, so like kind of like out there in the middle of nowhere. And the fact that I was able to like find some weird, crazy indie pop, in that rural of an area, sort of caught me off guard. Very happy to own that. These Things Too by Pearls Before Swine. Some Tim Rapp is sort of is folk music here. I like this album quite a bit. I think the albums that other people like the most from him are like Balaclava, which I never really got into, and there's These Things Too. I think this is probably my favorite from Pearls Before Swine. It's a lot of songs in here that sort of raise the hair on my arms. Pretty good album. There's a cover there of I Shall Be Free from the band, which I think is better than the original. Alien Lanes by Guided by Voices. This is a really fantastic album. It's a matter of fact, I'd say this is probably in my top 5 albums. This is some sort of reissue from 2018. Well, no, actually, I think closer to around 2021-ish. It's got the cool red and green marbled vinyl. Very good album. I'm very happy to own this. There's 30 songs on this album, or was it 28? I can't quite remember. There's a ton of songs on this album, all of them ranging between like 20 seconds to like I don't know 2 or 3 minutes. So it's a very fast-paced album, and all of it's like very, very interesting. I think when I really started getting into Guided by Voices, there was sort of a period where I was listening to this album maybe like once or sometimes twice a day. It's just it just offers so much in just 40 minutes. This is a funny one. One of my more recent acquisitions. Original copy of the second album by the Fugs. Very, very irreverent. Very, very funny. And very fun to listen to. Very, very offensive. This is definitely not for kids. And the fact that this charted in 1966 when it was released is just, crazy to me. Like people talk about how obscene and vulgar music is today, and there was definitely some of that happening in the 60s. Maybe it wasn't like super prominent as it is today, but it was happening. It's sort of a live album with Procol Harum with a full orchestra. They have the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra, and I guess they have some sort of choir with them. I really like Procol Harum, I think it's pronounced. Procol Harum's first 3 albums, and they're playing these songs with a full-sized orchestra. It feels really appropriate. Pretty good album, pretty good live album for that matter. I have Spring, their self-titled album. I think this is probably their only album. There is an album called Spring 2, which is some sort of like leftover material that was released much, much more later. This is on the famous RCA Neon label. This is not an original copy. That would have cost me about $500, and sort of the lame thing about this reissue is that it's just simply a gatefold, whereas the original was a trifold. It's progressive rock for sure, but it's not super crazy. All the songs in here go down like super smoothly. It's not like mind-blowing. It's not like you have to go out and listen to this. I wouldn't consider this mandatory listening, but I think it's a decent album, and I'm glad to own it. Jeez, I get the dust jacket back on here. McDonald and Giles, their album from around 1970-ish. This was McDonald and Giles from what do you say? King Crimson. Right after they came out of King Crimson, I think it's Ian McDonald and Michael Giles. There was also a Peter Giles in there who did some stuff with sort of like early incarnations of King Crimson. I haven't listened to this a lot, and last time I checked, this wasn't on Spotify, even though it's a very good album. In fact, this is something I haven't listened to in a while. I need to listen to this again sometime very soon, to make a mental note of that. I've got Lizard by King Crimson. This is my personal favorite from King Crimson, an absolutely phenomenal album. I think the artwork is really cool. You can spend a very, like Dookie by Green Day, you can just spend a long time looking at the artwork on this cover. They have Gordon Haskell as the singer, one of the band's many different singers. He sang one song on their second album, In the Wake of Poseidon, that being Cadence and Cascade, and he sang all the songs on here, brought back as a sort of a permanent member. But I guess he thought this music was just so weird, when I guess he was kind of like more of a Motown type of guy. He didn't want to be caught dead performing this stuff live, so he left the band. So you can't find any like live performances with him singing this material. I think his big problem, if I remember correctly, was on the song "Happy Family," which is supposed to be a song about the Beatles' recent breakup, which is a very good song, by the way. He would have had to have a voice modifier over his voice, and he really didn't want to do that, I guess. Absolutely fantastic. Gordon Haskell has a very, very deep voice, so it's certainly an acquired taste, and I didn't like it the first time I listened to it. Another one of my albums that's easily in my top 5 is "Begin" by the Millennium. This is absolutely phenomenal choral pop, in my opinion. I don't know, you can crucify me if you wish. I think this is as good as anything the Beach Boys or the Beatles ever did. Every song on here is just an absolute killer. And just really phenomenal. They made this one album and then they promptly disappeared off the face of the earth. And it says "to be continued" on the back cover. No, they would not continue after this, which is a shame. I think the sort of the interesting thing is I think Columbia spent an enormous amount of money. Columbia Records, that is, put an enormous amount of money into getting this album produced, and not really anyone bought it, which was a shame. I think this was the most expensive album Columbia had ever made by that point, and then they had been around for quite some time before them. Burnt Weenie Sandwich by the Mothers of Invention. I like the Mothers of Invention quite a bit, and this album is certainly no exception. Not as weird as "The Weasels Rip My Flesh," just despite the kind of a funny title. It's probably one of their more straightforward sort of jazz rock albums, but and there's a little bit of like doo-wop stuff, like WPLJ. Yeah, it's a pretty good album. Got a reissue of Strawberry Alarm Clock, tongue twister. Strawberry Alarm Clock's second album, "Wake Up It's Tomorrow." This is a really fantastic psychedelic pop album. I like this a little bit better than the first album, "Incense and Peppermint." I have really great songs in there. Pretty weird and kind of almost has this sort of dark vibe to it, which I like. The Yes album. At one point, I really considered this to be my favorite album. I originally had some sort of sort of original U.S. release of this album that I mail ordered, and it came without the cover. But I was like 13 at the time, so I didn't really give a damn, not as much as I would do now. So I have this reissue that I got from I don't know where. I might have picked this up from Barnes and Noble, which I don't know. That's like a cardinal sin, being like a record collector and buying records from a big box store like that. But well, yeah. This is I think now, in retrospect, I think I like Relayer a little bit better, but this is just absolutely fantastic. Starship Trooper, the guitar solo on there, I think is what is sort of the moment I had where I became a fan of Yes and prog rock in general. Blodwyn Pig, a head rings out. Sort of I think from around 1969ish. It's kind of just blues rock. I'm not a super huge fan of this album. It's not totally intolerable, but I don't really pick that one up very often. A reissue of Phallus Day by Amon Düül II. Amon Düül II, I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that right, is it's an extremely weird album. This is their first album after breaking apart from the original carnation of Amon Düül, hence the 2 at the end. It's I guess the best way I could probably describe this is just like, okay, eating an entire booklet of acid tabs while simultaneously dying of food poisoning. It has kind of like a very sickly, nauseous feeling. If you could like make nausea convert that feeling into sort of like music form, then this album would be just that. I still kind of like this. I've come around to it a lot. It's Germany. It's a German band. They're singing in English sometimes and German other times, and the German accent is very weird. It's definitely an acquired taste. Elton John's Greatest Hits. My brother is a super huge fan of Elton John. I never got super into him. I'm perfectly content just owning one of his greatest hits albums. So, not much more to say about that. Copy of And Justice for All. I don't really listen to metal anymore, and I quite frankly, I don't know what this is doing in my record collection, because, right around the time I started getting into collecting vinyl, which was when I was around 12, 13-ish, I was sort of coming away from my heavy metal phase, and this is sort of one of the products of that. I don't have much to say about Metallica. I'm not a really huge fan. I got one more from the road. The 4 is crossed out, I guess, by Leonard Skinner. I don't really like Southern rock. I think my brother might have bought this, and this just ended up in my collection. I don't have much to say about that. Yeah, we're kind of getting into some stuff that my brother had when he was briefly collecting vinyl, although he didn't really keep up with me. His taste in music's pretty decent too, but he likes a lot more of sort of stuff with a sort of a southern flavor. This is Rolling Stones Rewind. It's got a bunch of, it's like some stuff from their early 70s albums. Except I'm not a huge Rolling Stones fan, so there's not much on there that I would die for. Leonard Skinner's first album. Okay, I mean there's a few classics on here, but I won't reach for this very often. Permanent Vacation by Aerosmith. I was really huge into Aerosmith when I was 11, but I sort of grew out of it. There's a few songs from them that I like, but no, I don't listen to this. I can't remember if I bought that or if my brother got that. Fly Like an Eagle by the Steve Miller Band. To be honest, I haven't really given this much of a listen. I know the song Fly Like an Eagle gets played on the radio quite a bit, and I do like that song. Steve Miller Band's, some of his hits and stuff are pretty good, but I've never actually really sat down and listened to one of their albums from start to finish. Okay, Toys in the Attic. Like I said, I'm not a huge Aerosmith fan, but yeah, there's a few songs in here that are okay. Uncle Salty is a pretty good song. It's kind of just inane, basic rock and roll music that's kind of super edgy and super sexual. I think it's just okay. Let's see. Draw the Line by Aerosmith. Or is that the name of the album? What's the name of this album? Yeah, it's Draw the Line. Kings and Queens is an okay song. Not really huge into it. So not huge into really Aerosmith anymore. I keep messing them up with Aerosmith and Rolling. I keep messing up Aerosmith with the Rolling Stones, which I guess is sort of appropriate because Aerosmith is so heavily inspired by the Rolling Stones. I got Goodbye Yellow Brick Road by Elton John. Is this a reissue? It's a trifold cover. I think because I know my brother had an actual new reissue of this album, but I remember I bought one of these albums from a flea market, and it only had the first record, so I can't remember how this came into my collection, because there's definitely both records inside of here. Yeah, I've never actually sat down and listened to this from start to finish, but there's definitely a lot of really, really good songs in here. I guess Roy Rogers and Funeral for a Friend. I really, being a sort of a prog guy, I really like Funeral for a Friend. Betty and the Jets, it's a great song, of course, too. But I mean, I don't know what else I could really say about this that hasn't already been said. Elton John's second album, his self-titled album. I never really sat down and listened to this either. I think I might have bought this album. Your Song is that the name of it? Is pretty good, and Border Song are pretty good. Probably I only know them because they're on his greatest hits. Here's one that's definitely from my my collection. It's Sky. I think this is their second album. This is sort of like, put together by a classical guitarist named John Williams. It's not the same John Williams who did the soundtrack for Star Wars. It's a completely different John Williams. It's okay stuff. It's all instrumental. If you really like the instrumental stuff that the Alan Parsons Project has done, then you'd really also like this album as well. And their catalog in general. Stereotomy by the Alan Parsons Project. Speaking of the Alan Parsons Project, this originally came with some sort of like a polarized light sleeve, which depending on what orientation you put this album into the sleeve, you might only see like the stuff in blue or the stuff in red. This is one of their later 80s albums. I think it's their second to last album of their like 11 album run. And I think by the fourth or fifth album, people had really stopped paying attention to them. If you look on Rate Your Music, it has, I think, probably the lowest rating of all of their albums. And I kind of disagree with that, because I do think there's a few decent songs on this album. I really liked it when I was 14, 15. The title track is pretty good. The Real World, I like that one quite a bit. Limelight is okay. It has Gary Brooker from Procol Harum singing this. Yeah, I think it's an okay album. Got a copy of some sort of reissue of Purple Rain by Prince. Subject of 80s. I haven't ever really dived deep into Prince's discography, but the title track on here has a really fantastic guitar solo. So it's pretty good stuff, I suppose. This is definitely one from my brother's record collection, 1770 from Elton John. I guess it's a live album. It's recorded in 1970, so that's pretty early in his career. I think he made his first album in 1969, if I'm not mistaken. I got some sort of 80s reissue of White Light, White Heat by the Velvet Underground. The ring wear is just horrendous on this. I really, really like this album. The Velvet Underground is probably my favorite band. Just absolutely fantastic. Their rawest album by far. Very difficult a difficult thing to listen to, especially with headphones on for the first time. I definitely did not like that album first time I heard it, but boy did it grow on me. Classic Yes album, Close to the Edge. Super highly critically acclaimed. A lot of people consider this the best Yes album, and I think it's very, very solid from start to finish, of course, but I think I like the Yes album and Relayer a little bit better. Still very, very great. Here, I've got a box set of Emerson, Lake and Palmer's first 5 albums on picture disc. I'll show you guys a particular copy. I think maybe one of the most expensive items in my collection. So there's pictures at an exhibition. I'll show you a few, and I've got their first self-titled album. Really, really liked Emerson, Lake and Palmer when I was like a teenager, and now it's like okay, I think they're okay now, but it was like kind of like at the peak of my Emerson, Lake and Palmer phase. I think maybe around 8th grade, 9th grade. Very cool to own that. I was very glad to be able to get a copy of that box set when I was young. Vandergraaf Generator. This would be their, I think, 4th album, Palm Hearts. Pretty cool artwork here. Probably my favorite from Vandergraaf Generator, although I sort of, tend to swivel back and forth between Palm Hearts and H to He, Who I Am the Only One. Plague of the Lighthouse Keepers is such one of those great prog epics. Not much more to say about it. have John Lennon and Yoko Ono with their Plastic Ono Band. Live piece in Toronto, 1969. It's supposed to be like a Back to Roots revival festival for rock and roll back in like 1969 in Toronto. Of course, they had a bunch of other people playing here. I think Eric Clapton joined along to play with these guys. There's also Klaus Voormann, who did the artwork for Beatles' Revolver, and who would also join, John Lennon to play bass on most of his other albums. And there's Alan White, before he joined Yes, playing on this. At the festival as well, I think Alice Cooper was there for one of their very, very early concerts before they had, done anything. I think this was even before they released their first album. I don't know how they got to be able to play at a festival with, the likes of John Lennon at that time. I think you can pretty easily find bootlegs of that first concert with Alice Cooper. It was. I don't know if it was their first concert. In fact, it probably wasn't, but it was definitely a very early concert. And you can find bootlegs of it if you want to listen to it. Surf's Up by the Beach Boys. A lot of people really like this sort of like later Beach Boys album. It's one of those later Beach Boys albums that has pretty serious critical acclaim, and I think that there's definitely some really great songs in here. Some of them not so great. I guess Field Flows and A Day in the Life of the Tree don't really resonate for me. People really hate Student Demonstration Time. I think it's an okay song, although I don't want to sound like a Mike Love apologist. Title track is absolutely phenomenal. Don't Go Near the Water and Long Promised Road are very, very, very great songs. Well worth owning the record for those three songs, if nothing else sort of suits your fancy. It's a reissue of Monster Movie from Spoon Records, Can's own personal label, by the Can, their first album, not the original artwork though. This is a really fantastic album. It is so weird and dissonant compared to everything else that was being made at the time. They originally made, I think they originally privately pressed. There was an initial run of 500 copies of this album. They all sold out absolutely immediately. So they made another run of 500 more on this, private label, privately pressed, and that sold out immediately. And then there was like a bidding war, to be able to, get the band signed to a major label, and they eventually signed to Liberty Records. Yeah, it's fantastic. Gandalf, self-titled album. I think I got this as like a record store day release. This was released a few record store days back. Just psychedelic pop from 1969, American band. It's okay. Another cover of "Hang On to a Dream" by Tim Hardin, which was pretty good to me. It's like a standout. I'm not a huge Steely Dan fan, but at Gaucho, I think I bought this after hearing the story of just how arduous it was to go through and actually produce this album. Glad to own it. Babylon Sisters is such a great song. Let's see here. Oh, I looks like I might have missed one. Thick as a Brick by Jethro Tull. This is one of those albums where there's a single 40-minute track split up across two sides. This is my personal favorite from Jethro Tull. I've got a bunch of Jethro Tull albums in here, and this one is this one's by far my favorite. It's got this sort of newspaper. You can fold it out into like a newspaper, and you can go from page to page. And all the pages appear to be here, so I was very lucky, because I did get this at a flea market. So I was very lucky to be able to nab one with all the pages in there. If you have a copy of this, or there's a connect the dots portion in this album, and if you do it, you get kind of a funny picture in there. I'm not going to say any more than that. Music from Big Pink by the band. This is a reissue. Although when I did buy it, it was used already. Pretty great album. It's a classic album. Nothing much more to say about it than that. I showed you guys Lumpy Gravy by Frank Zappa a little bit ago, and how I tried to explain how that was not the original mix. What Zappa had initially planned for the album to be, and that he had to sort of like rearrange the entirety of the music to be able to get it released for Verve Records. But here's the actual here's a copy of the album with the actual original music, as Frank Zappa had initially intended it to be. This was a few record store days back as well. I like it quite a bit. It's on red vinyl, and I guess it's like only like 25 minutes long, so it is 45 RPM speed. I like this quite a bit. I'm very glad to own it. Let's see what's next here. I have another Frank Zappa album. His second album without the Mothers of Invention. It's Chunga's Revenge. Pretty solid from start to finish. Pretty cool. I got a lot of Frank Zappa albums. Nothing in particular to say about this album. The reissue of Ars Achel's first album. Originally, when this was released, it was privately pressed. It had Steve Hillage of Gong, along with the three members of the band Egg. They were originally part of a band called Uriel, and they wanted to release this album. But I think by the time they found someone willing to issue this music, Egg was already signed to a particular label. I think they were on Duran, if I'm not mistaken. And they were contractually obligated to them, so they couldn't release this music under the name Uriel. For some reason, which is very strange. So they just changed their name to Ars Achel just for the purpose of getting this album out. And all the names of the people actually on this album are sort of changed to something else, kind of ridiculous sounding. This is original copies of this are like highly sought after, to the point where people have made fake original copies, like inauthentic copies of the original. It's a decent album. The album that's not so decent is a self-titled album by Orangutan. This is kind of just like really, really basic blues rock, where one of those albums where original copies are super expensive. I'm not really quite sure why. There's a lot of like really great music out in the world that didn't get the attention it deserved. This is not one of those albums. It's just super basic blues rock. I'm not a huge fan of it. I only paid about $25, $30 for it, but which isn't the end of the world, but it is what it is. One of my favorites from Frank Zappa, the Grand Wazoo, is him doing jazz music. I tend to like Frank Zappa's jazz stuff the best. He has a bunch of musicians play on this. Super underrated in his catalog, if you ask me. Got another Zappa album, The Mothers of Invention, Uncle Meat. There's a story behind that name, I guess. This was supposed to be the soundtrack to a movie that they were going to release, but they ended up not releasing the movie because they realized, I guess, that the post-production costs would be way too expensive, and it says on the cover, I think they would have needed about somewhere in the liner notes says they needed like $300,000 in '60s money to be able to complete this. It's a lot of sort of like instrumental noodling on this compared to most of the previous albums that the Mothers made. Comes with this nice little book. This is a reissue, by the way. It's still pretty good. There's a lot of really great moments on it. So I don't really like modern music that much, as you might have gathered by this point. But I got Unknown Moral Orchestra 2. That is their second album. It's pretty good. Swim and Sleep Like a Shark. It might be if I made like a top 10 songs list. That just might go on there. It's sort of like newer music goes. This is a pretty good album. There's that really sort of like minor hit on here. So Good at Being in Trouble. It's kind of like obnoxious and teenager-ish, I guess. I mean, not super obnoxious. It's not totally intolerable, but the rest of the album is just really, really great to me. Third album by the Chocolate Watch Band. It's a reissue. It's One Step Beyond. This is I'm not really quite sure much to say about this. They were kind of running out of steam by this point because a lot of them were really heavily using drugs. So a lot of the songs in here are a little bit basic, but I still like the music. Uncle Morris, the opening track, is a decent song. And I think the album itself is only like 27 minutes. If that demonstrates just how much they were running out of steam. Original copies of this, again, yeah, that would be quite a bit of money, like a few hundreds. It's the same for all three of their albums. Got Dreams by Gabor Szabo, or I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. He's a Hungarian classical guitarist, and I guess psychedelic music, with weird psychedelic music being possible and marketable to teens. I guess they want to market some of this guy's music to teens, and it is pretty good. It is pretty solid. Classical guitar instrumentals bring this good atmosphere. I think it's one of those albums that's sort of gotten renewed attention because the YouTube algorithm has been pushing the full album upload for that. We've got World Music by Goat. It's got this really crazy die cut cover where they cut out a bunch of W's from the album cover. You have to be really careful when you're sliding this in to your record shelf to avoid perforating any of the strips created by this die cut. It's a weird Swedish band. If you look at pictures of them, it looks like some sort of like extreme hardcore black death metal band. But no, it's not. They're just making psychedelic music. It's got sort of rough fuzz tones to the guitars. I like it quite a bit, even though I don't really reach for kind of like fuzzed out music all that much. It's pretty good. This came out in 2014, and Anthony Fantano actually reviewed it and gave a pretty lukewarm review of it, which is a little bit upsetting because it is pretty decent. Let's see. Got Record Store Day reissue of Wonderwall Music by George Harrison. It's on I guess the front cover is on the back, and the front cover is left with a hole to show you the picture disc. It's one of these zoetrope records where the figures are supposed to sort of dance around. It's supposed to give you the illusion of the figures dancing around when you spin it. I haven't really been able to see anything super fascinating when I play this on my record player, but I'm so glad to own a good copy of this. I do have a copy of an original copy of Wonderwall Music somewhere in here, but it's pretty badly beat up. It's a soundtrack to the movie called Wonderwall, and I don't think anything about this soundtrack or the movie itself has anything to do with Wonderwall by Oasis. I really like this album a lot. It's got like a lot of really beautiful sitar arrangements, and I think this is probably the first album that George Harrison released solo. It was 1968. I think it's the first thing that George Harrison or any member of the Beatles released on Apple Records. It was their first release. It's mostly just sort of like film music. no singing on it or anything. It's just sort of, sitars. And I think the only role that George Harrison had in this was that he was sort of directing the musicians. Very glad to own this. It's a very pretty album, music-wise. Put this back in here. I don't know if I could really show you the cover to this, but let's see here, because there's a little bit of nudity on here. Show you the inside cover. A Nice Pair by Pink Floyd. So this was just the cover is very badly beaten up, as you can see. It was sort of a way of reissuing and repackaging their first two albums, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn and The Saucer Full of Secrets. Now I have a U.S. copy, and for some odd reason, they decided to put the live version of Astronomie Domine, or Domini, or however you pronounce it. The first song on their first album, they put the live version on it from Umaguma on here instead of the original, stereo mix from 1967, which is kind of lame because if you haven't realized, especially before Pink Floyd started this reissue campaign around 2017, 2018-ish, it was very, very, very hard to get an original copy of Piper at the Gates of Dawn or A Saucer Full of Secrets. So finding this at the record store was kind of a relief for me, but the fact that they don't have an original mix of Astronomy, the first song from Piper at the Gates of Dawn really kind of peeved me. But now they have started reissuing all the Pink Floyd albums, so I do have a decent copy of Piper at the Gates of Dawn, both a stereo mix and a mono mix, and believe me, the mono mix is strictly superior. They should really put that on Spotify sometime soon. Next album I have here is the Beatles White Album box set. So it comes with a copy of the Beatles White Album inside, but also a copy of the Esher demos. So that the demo songs that they recorded before going into the studio. And there's a bunch of these demos that didn't versions of songs that didn't make it onto the White Album. So that, for instance, you can get the demo for Junk, which McCartney ended up releasing on his first solo album, and some other weird stuff. I'm very glad to own this. It's just the stereo mix. I think it would have been nice if they did like a really fully fledged box set where they had also the mono mix of the album, which has some pretty serious differences from the stereo mix. And if they had also included some of the outtakes from the studio sessions, like the Spotify version of this album, this like 218 50th anniversary edition, has a bunch of extra songs. That didn't appear in this particular box set. So there's Not Guilty by George Harrison. Like they had take 102 of it or something, which is a really great song. And it's kind of sad that they didn't that they weren't able to fit this in on the album. But I'm so glad to own this anyway. I think I paid about $80 for this. The price has gone down quite a bit because I had waited a while to get that. Captain Beyond's first album, their first of 3 albums. This is a pretty good album. It's very, very ambitious. A lot of the songs are pretty intricate. They would kind of tone down that intricacy in their second album. This is pretty good. It's like early 70s, sort of like hard rock, but with a little bit of a progressive flair to it. King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, their album 2015, Quarters. I like this album quite a bit. I think, in fact, this is my favorite album from King Gizzard. I bought this from the record store specifically because, the name was sort of similar to King Crimson. And nothing to do with King Crimson, but music is super intricate on here, and as the name implies, quarters. There's 4 songs. Each of them are 10 minutes and 10 seconds in length. It's a pretty great album. It sort of like unfolds out into like 4 different pieces. Very glad I own that. Under the Bushes, Under the Stars by Guided by Voices. This is probably their first album that wasn't like totally lo-fi. Very well produced, and a lot of the songs in here have a sort of a magical quality. It's definitely one of their best albums. I don't like it as much as Alien Lanes, but with that album being just so difficult to top, I can't really hold that against them. The thing about Guided by Voices is, they've got 45 albums, and I don't think I've even really delved halfway into their discography, but if you can pump out 40 some albums and even have 10 of them be pretty good, that's 10 good albums. So I definitely spent a lot of time with Guided by Voices, and for a little while they were pretty much like the only thing I was listening to, but because they just have so much good stuff to go through. One album that's kind of important to me is Head East. I've been listening to Head East, this album specifically, since I was at least 4 years old, because my parents really, really liked it. It's I can't get, I can't rant and rave about this album too much, because it is just basic rock. There's some sort of like 70s sort of like radio friendly rock music from the mid 70s in Illinois, but this has some sentimental value to me. It's fairly solid even today. The opening track, Open Up the Door, it has such a really great guitar riff to it. Two Virgins by John Lennon and Yoko Ono. This album it's kind of like a noise album, like the A&M album I had shown. I'm not going to pull the brown paper cover off of this, because on the front cover they are posing, John Lennon and Yoko Ono are posing here completely nude, and on the back cover, well, it's you get to see their backsides, whereas the front is you're getting full frontal. Kind of an experimental album, also released on Apple Records. I think it was super controversial when it was first released. A bunch of copies that got shipped as exports to the United States from the UK got seized by customs agents because in their eyes it was akin to selling pornography. If you like noise and experimental music, it's an okay album. It's like it's definitely weird, but it's not like groundbreaking and like how experimental it was. It was just kind of like a home recording between John Lennon and Yoko Ono. I'm going to butcher the French pronunciation of this. L'Apocalypse des Animaux or something by Vangelis Papathanassiou. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that Greek name, but so this was a soundtrack that he made for some sort of like animal documentary. I think this is like his I think technically his third album by this point. It's soundtrack music. It's Vangelis. It's not really something that you're supposed to listen to super intently. It is pretty nice. There's a song in here that I've seen show up on the internet, like a certain one of these instrumental tracks, La Petite Fille de la Mer. However you say that, I think. I've seen that show up in like Instagram reels and stuff. So I think this album's not the music on this album is not super obscure, but yeah, it's all right. So Vangelis being from Aphrodite's Child, and then later going on to work with like John Anderson from Yes. Sort of interesting to have. This is King Crimson, Starless and Bible Black. Their sixth album, I think. Yeah, their sixth album. Definitely not my favorite from King Crimson. I think their first five run of albums, the first five albums were all fantastic from start to finish. But this album, there's a little bit of dead weight on here. I think the instrumental track "Will Let You Know." It's not intolerable, but it's also not something. I mean, it's like dead weight. It's sort of an uninspired instrumental, and the title track on this album I didn't like all that much either. But it's still pretty good. "Fracture" is such a great instrumental. "The Great Deceiver" is a really great song, and so is "Lament," and "Trio" is a really nice instrumental as well. I originally had a sort of a West German copy of this album that had like a textured cover to it, which was really cool. But there was mold growing on on the inside and inside the gatefold, which was kind of gross. But now I got a nice reissue of this album, so I can't complain anymore. "Salisbury" by Uriah Heep. I think there's a few different. There's one other UK cover version. Variant of the cover with some guy sitting on top of a tank or something. There's a few good songs in here, but I'm not super huge on Uriah Heep. They're mostly okay. A lot of their albums have some good songs and some bad songs. "The Park" and "Time to Live." Those I could do without those. "High Priestess" and "Lady in Black," and then there's the 16-minute epic "Salisbury," the title track, which is also pretty good. Haven't listened to this in a very long time. I think I might have to take another listen, at least to those songs. "Isolation Drills" from Guided by Voices from 2001. It's by far probably the most polished album up to that point. They're on like a new record label, I think TBT Records. And this actually charted for a change. And this is sort of interesting here because there are this is a particular reissue where instead of issuing this on a single double LP, they release it onto two 33-inch records that run at 45 RPM. The cover is like this sort of like nice trifold. I don't know if I can get the whole thing in here, but yeah, it's pretty cool. It's definitely one of the better Guided by Voices albums. I mean, I think out of like the 20 or so Guided by Voices albums I have listened to, this would probably be in the top 5. It's kind of a beat up copy. The cover is pretty faded somehow. "Weasels Rip My Flesh" by Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. Pretty good album. It's very, very weird. Very, very weird. Even by Frank Zappa standards, I would say. I like it. It's pretty good. "X in Search of Space" by Hawkwind. It's got sort of like this weird sort of fold-out cover where you, I don't know, kind of like a stereo box. You can put the tab into, the other tab here. I'm not really explaining this super adequately, but now I gotta get the tab back in here. Shit. Got this from a record store for like $30 or something like that. I'm not a huge Hawkwind fan, but this album is really, really cool. It's their second album. We got Lemmy Kilmister from Motorhead fame on here. Copy of "Fool's Mate" by what's his name? Peter Hamill from Vandergraaf Generator. This is a Dutch pressing. I actually got this from somewhere in downtown Chicago. Didn't realize it was a Dutch pressing until I got home. It's okay. I mean, "Imperial Zeppelin" is a pretty good song. So a weird thing about this is it's got the Philips label on the front and it's got the Charisma label on the back. I'm not quite sure why that is. Soft Machine 4th. Very great album. They completely transitioned from a psychedelic rock band to a jazz rock band. This is pretty great album from start to finish. The last album that they would have with Robert Wyatt. The Faust tapes. So this is the back cover, this is the front cover, and the sort of the weird thing about this cover is there's a bunch of text just plastered to the front cover, and if you actually have a copy that you can read, you can see that they're all like, you know, great reviews about the band's music. And I think, you know, putting like good reviews of your music on one of your album covers is an extremely indulgent thing to do. It seemed to be kind of like a thing people would do on like hype stickers even to this day. And then, you know, but even on the actual cover back in like the mid 60s and before that, very, very indulgent. And it seems here that they're putting all these good reviews on their front cover as sort of maybe they're, I take it that they might be sort of like mocking that trend. Or maybe they just wanted to like show off how cool they were. Maybe they were being indulgent. I don't know. Soft Machines, first album, pretty good album. I'm a really huge Soft Machine fan, so that's really nice to own. Very clunky, sort of like off-kilter sounding psychedelic pop. Very, very cool. David Bedford's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. This is another one of those albums where it's one song, 40 minutes, split up into two sides, two 20-minute pieces. It's a concept album about the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. I think it's Samuel Coleridge who wrote the poem. Yes, it's Coleridge. That's what the back cover says. So a lot of narration on this album, and some choral music as well. I used to really despise choir music, but I think this album sort of changed my mind in the way I perceive choir music. This is it's a pretty good album, very atmospheric, and towards the end there's this really fantastic melodic guitar solo. I don't think it's available on Spotify though, unfortunately. Classic album. It's Here Come the Warm Jets by Brian Eno from 1974. It's one of those albums that has like, not very many people bought this album back in the day, but people who think of themselves as music critics really, really love this album a lot, and it's pretty solid from start to finish. It kind of artsy, but it's he go on to make a bunch of like ambient music after this, but this was just kind of quirky pop music, and I like it quite a bit. Looking On by The Move. This is, I think, a U.S. pressing from, I think, sometime later in the 70s, after 1970 when it was originally released. The Move made 4 albums, 3 of which were worth listening to more than once, and this is one of them. It's a pretty good song. I think Jeff Lynne got in around this time, and he contributes a little bit. Although he has a song on here called "Open Up, Set the World Up at the Door," which is super grating. A lot of like really irritating falsetto on here, but pretty much everything else on here is pretty good. They had a song called "Brontosaurus," which Cheap Trick covered. I don't know how Cheap Trick got into The Move, because I think The Move, they were very, very successful in the UK, but practically unheard of in the US. So I don't know, Cheap Trick was getting a hold of their material. Forever Changes by Love, classic psychedelic pop album from 1967 or 68-ish. Arthur Lee, really great, very well produced. It's super, really super highly praised. Also on the Elektra label. Not really much to say about it apart from that, except that it's a pretty solid album. Sort of a beat-up copy of Red by King Crimson. I think the record was in a mostly okay condition, but the seams are splitting super badly. Everyone really likes this album a lot. People who think of themselves as music critics, especially, and I like this album for the most part, except Providence. That song is sort of like a kind of like a uninteresting instrumental improv, piece that they put on. I mean, King Crimson does a lot of these, improv instrumentals, and some of them are really, really great, and some of them are not so much. It's really a mixed bag. Like Asbury Park on the USA live album was very good, but not a huge fan of Providence. This was sort of, I guess, originally a bootleg recording of Yes playing at Yale in, I don't know, like 1971-ish, around the time they released the Yes album. But I think that this was officially reissued for Record Store Day. They're playing at Yale College in New Haven, Connecticut. It's it's not the best sound quality. This was released for Record Store Day, I think, but it's okay. Song Remains the Same by Led Zeppelin. I can't remember how I got a hold of this. I'm not a huge fan of Led Zeppelin stuff live. I'm not super huge into this. I guess the soundtrack to the movie. This is The Worst of Jefferson Airplane. I have no idea how I got this. No memory of how this... I don't know what it's doing here. Don't even know what songs are in here. I guess it's got this nice textured cover. I don't know, there's a few songs in here. I guess some stuff from After Bathing at Bax's, which I like, and some of the really good songs from Surrealistic Pillow. Oh, I'll take it. Coming to the end of the shelf here. Mag Earwig by Guided by Voices. So I think after sort of the original, incarnation of the band on the major label Matador with Guided by Voices, after they sort of split up, Robert Pollard, the singer, put a new band together from, I guess, this other band from Dayton called, I think, Cobra Verde. It's few pretty good songs in here. Not as good as their previous album, Under the Bushes, Under the Stars, but still pretty good, fairly solid. Kind of an interesting band here. Maybe a little bit of a content warning, nudity. It's the Flower Traveling Band. It's their album Anywhere. They're all riding naked on motorcycles. If you can see that in the gatefold, you can see this one guy in the back, sort of like tailing everyone. This is a Japanese band, I guess led by a guy named Joe Yamanaka, who I guess went to like the UK and saw Black Sabbath performing live and got really invested into rock music, and he put together this album of a bunch of covers. So there's Louisiana Blues, which I think was like Muddy Waters. It's like the title track from Black Sabbath's self-titled album. House of the Rising Sun, which the Animals did. 21st Century Schizoid Man by King Crimson. The version they do of Louisiana Blues on here is really fantastic, but for the most part, they're it's okay. Cool to have. This is a reissue, because that's another one of those albums where original copies are stupidly expensive. Got a #1 record by Big Star. So, some great power pop from the mid-'70s. Rolling Stone praises the ever-living hell out of this band, and I mean for decent reason. There's a bunch of really good songs on here. Those bands that it wasn't very famous at the time, but I think there's been enough like word of mouth, lip service about the band that they're much better known now than they were 50 years ago. First album by Pearls Before Swine, One Nation Underground. This is a reissue in mono, It sounds it's a pretty solid album from start to finish. I like it. There's a couple of really good songs in here. I'm very glad to own a mono mix, although I'm not quite sure whether the mono mix would be superior in any way to the stereo mix. I just like the idea of having like a mono mix if there was a mono mix. It's got the Hieronymus Bosch cover, the Hell panel from his Garden of Earthly Delights for the cover, which is really cool. I remember this painting shows up in a lot of very odd places. For example, I guess if you play Zombies Black Ops 2 in the town, and you go on the second floor of that building where the mystery box can spawn, there's like a painting on the wall in that room, just showing the ears with the knife coming out of them, which was cool. And I remember seeing that. I was like, I've seen that somewhere. I've seen that knife in the ears before. And then I eventually realized, oh yeah, I've got this album. I still play Black Ops and Black Ops 2 because I'm old school like that. I still enjoy playing the PS3 every now and then. I think that's all I have from the second shelf, the second row of my shelf to the right here. I still have 6 more of these rows to go through, so that there's quite a lot more work to do.